Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So again, anybody who's interested in the welfare of Egypt will see now who they are. The first thing you do is if you're Obama, you announce an immediate emergency food aid delivery in the ballpark of several million tons of grain and other food products. If you're inside the country, you want to increase the minimum wage for everybody. You want to lower the prices of bread, cooking oil, fuel, and other necessary basic staples. You want to have a debt freeze. You want to have a debt moratorium. You want to kick the International Monetary Fund out. You want to widen and modernize the Suez Canal. You want to do the whole Tennessee Valley Authority treatment for the Nile. See the plans of Ibrahim Kamel on his website. You want to have a housing program. Obviously, in the course of this, you've got to seize control of your central bank and force them to emit 0% credit for production, since the banking system is now in a shambles. So maybe somewhere there's a colonel who is disgusted by the servility of the foreign governments, to the foreign governments by the generals. The other thing, of course, is the buffoonery of Obama and Panetta on that Thursday, February 10th, when they announced that Mubarak would be gone by the end of the day, and he was able to defy them at least for another 12 to 24 hours. This has now revealed that this was a CIA coup from the word go, and we've now got a military junta. So the singing tomorrows of democracy lead to what amounts to a military coup, as you could hear on CBS News, the wire services yesterday morning, soft coup, and on CNN, it's a coup, we heard in the middle of the morning. Look at my Twitter feed. You can see some of these things written there in real time. So this is now the situation. Just in terms of the technical problems of the color revolution, right? You've got to think about the whole question of the coup d'etat, right? There are books about this. You've got Curzio Malaparte, who's written about the coup d'etat, the Kapp Putsch in Germany in 1920, Mussolini's March on Rome, 1922. You've also got other more modern. You've got a neocon who writes about these things. The question then is the model of this Anglo-American people power coup. I think it may turn out that the first large-scale attempt at this is France, the May 1968 against de Gaulle. And you'll remember that de Gaulle was able to hold on. He came back, he went to Germany to talk to the commander of the French army, I guess that was Massu at the time, and came back and said, look, reform, yes, but a big mess, no. La réforme, oui. La chienlit, no. So that was de Gaulle. The problem was he was then weakened because the attempted coup, which he was able to survive the May 1968. He was able to get the support of the army, and he was also able to stage a very large counter-demonstration of his own, pro-Gaullist, several days later, which was in many ways larger than the anti-de Gaulle demonstrations. However, he had this problem of Pompidou linked to the international bankers inside his government, and it was Pompidou then who bored from the inside and weakened de Gaulle to the point where he then resigned, I guess, in 1970. If you look at the coup d'etats on a world scale, you see that most of them have been done by the U.S. and the British. Going back to Portugal, 1975, the anti-Salazar, post-Salazar revolution of the carnations, right? That's in some ways a precursor of all of this. The overthrow of the Shah of Iran, absolutely clear case. Carter, Brzezinski wanted him out, and they wanted then the government that then followed with Khomeini. Marcos, 1985. This is Paul Wolfowitz doing this as U.S. ambassador to the Philippines. You might say the old-fashioned coup d'etat is the Latin American military golpe with the troops, the tanks. You take possession of the central square, take possession of the television station, the telephone exchange, the main government buildings, and you've got a coup. A variation on this is Cuba in 58 into 59, which was backed by the United States. So the U.S. was interested in dumping Fulgencio Batista. They thought that Castro was a puppet, but he turned out to be something else. That's inherently a danger in all this stuff, although perhaps a danger less so now than it was then when you had the Soviets that you could turn to. During the decade of the Audis, we've seen these cases, right? The Roses Revolution in Georgia, 2003 about, Ukraine, 2004, the Orange Revolution, both of those successful, although the Ukraine now completely rolled back and the Georgia one now completely discredited by Saakashvili, who's a warmonger and a dictator, worse than what you had before. Lebanon, 2005, the Cedars Revolution, so-called, was able to drive out the Syrian army, but not able to put in a complete permanent IMF dictatorship. And really, the Obama campaign of 2008 itself has to be seen as a step forward towards the current phase of color revolutions. What we've got today is the color revolutions on the model of Georgia, Ukraine, Lebanon, going all the way back to Belgrade, to Serbia in the year 2000. The Otpor, he's finished, right, Gotovye revolution there to oust Milosevic. Those are all one model. What you've now got is that model with the addition of Facebook, Twitter, the Internet, which was not widely available at the beginning of the current decade. So the Obama campaign is in some ways the laboratory for, it's interesting because the Obama methods were those brought back, right, brought home from Ukraine and Georgia and so forth, used in the United States in 2007, 2008, and then re-exported with the addition of the Internet stuff. Now, the other coups, the attempted color revolutions, I guess the big one is Tiananmen, 1989, with the Statue of Liberty and all this, right? It's obviously a U.S.-inspired coup coming in the middle of the collapse of all of the communist regimes, the Velvet Revolution in Prague, the fall of the East German communist regime, and so forth. Romania taking a more violent turn. Romania maybe looking a little bit more like Egypt and Tunisia today. The attempt to do this in Iran, the Twitter revolution in June 2009, a failure, defeated, because this is a country that does not have that degree of dependency on the U.S., right? It can exist institutionally on its own, and indeed has done so for several decades. Generally speaking, therefore, what you see in the area of attempted coups, putches, overthrows of government is they mainly come from the U.S. and the British. They are often successful, but not always. The big exceptions, China 1989, a failure, Iran 2009, a failure, Lebanon 2005, a partial failure. You can then say maybe Belarus in the end of last year was also a failure. Some of these are gray areas of classification. And there used to be in the world other coups, right? The coup, say, in Prague, Czechoslovakia in 1948 was a pro-Soviet coup. The coup d'etat of the colonels in Egypt in 1952 was essentially a group of nationalist officers who somehow crept into this space between the Soviets and the U.S. and indeed the old colonial powers, Britain and France at that time, and asserted themselves. But then as you get into the 70s, the incidence of pro-Soviet coups becomes very, very rare. Maybe Angola might qualify in the mid-1970s. But you'd also have to look at the coup d'etat by Gaddafi in Libya, 1968, Syria, 1970. But generally speaking, when you see a coup in today's world, until something changes, it's U.S.-British sponsored. We'll be back in a minute.